Thomas Jefferson was the third president of the United States. He was the leader of the Republican Party, and he was a strict constructionist of the Constitution. Strict construction means that the person who believes in it, the president in this case, contends that the Constitution allows a president, for our current example, to do only those things that it expressly authorizes the president to do. The same applies to the authorization given to Congress. The strict constructionist says, interpret the Constitution narrowly. Now, this in contrast to a broad constructionist who says, if the Constitution gives some idea that maybe this power, this authorization will be okay, then go ahead and do it. Jefferson, at the time he entered office in 1801, following his defeat of John Adams in the 1800 election, entered office as a strict constructionist. He believed that government should be small, that the president should be relatively inactive, and that most of what happened between individuals and government should happen at the state level. So he generally leaned toward states' rights, and he leaned toward a narrow construction of the Constitution. This was something that Jefferson had to deal with in both the best and the worst of his presidency. The best thing Thomas Jefferson ever did was to purchase the Louisiana Territory from France. It was something that he had to wrestle with his conscience about because it flew in the face of his strict construction interpretation of the Constitution. The offer of Louisiana, the Louisiana Territory, the territory is often called the Louisiana Purchase, came about because Napoleon, the Emperor of France, had decided that he was going to unload Louisiana. France at that time was the current owner, at least the current European claimant to the Louisiana Territory. The Native Americans who lived in the area had different ideas, but nonetheless, France claimed the Louisiana Territory. Napoleon decided he was going to unload it. He wanted to get rid of it. He had hoped that it would give rise to a revival of France's New World Empire, but that wasn't working out. Jefferson had been interested in purchasing New Orleans, the port city near the mouth of the Mississippi River. New Orleans was important to American commerce on the Mississippi River and therefore on the Ohio River, a tributary of the Mississippi. But Jefferson had no idea that Louisiana was for sale. When Napoleon responded to Jefferson's offer to purchase New Orleans by saying, "How would you like to purchase all of Louisiana?" Jefferson was flabbergasted, and he was also worried. He realized it was a great deal. It would essentially double the size of the United States. And for Jefferson in particular, this was a huge matter because Jefferson believed that American republicanism, it's moving in the direction of being called democracy, American democracy, rested on the strong shoulders of independent farmers. The United States in 1800 or 1801 or 1803, by the time this developed, was a nation primarily of farmers, perhaps 4 to 5 people, where farmers made their living from the land or near the land. And Jefferson realized that the American population was growing. For the American economy, for the American people to continue to prosper, they needed more land, more farmland. And so acquiring new land was crucial. And the offer of Louisiana, this was fantastic. Never in his wildest dreams had Jefferson thought that he would have the opportunity to make such a large addition to America's landed area. But he had a problem. The problem was that when he read his copy of the Constitution, it said nothing about the president having the authority to purchase territory from foreign powers. For that matter, the Constitution says nothing about Congress having the authority to purchase territory from a foreign power. And so Jefferson, he had to wrestle with this. It was a really good deal. It was a really great opportunity for the United States. But he didn't think he had the authority to go through with it. Now, he briefly thought about trying to amend the Constitution. That would resolve the problem. If the Constitution doesn't give you certain authority, change the Constitution to get that kind of authority. But he realized this would take a long time and Napoleon might change his mind. So what did he do? Well, basically, he swallowed his scruples and went ahead with the deal. It turned out to be the best real estate deal the United States ever made, probably one of the best real estate deals in the history of the human race. As I say, it doubled the size of the United States. It made the United States very nearly a continent-wide power. The United States, when Jefferson was young, when Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence in 1776, consisted of 13 states clinging to the Atlantic shore. With the purchase of Louisiana, the United States territory now extended to the crest of the Rocky Mountains, and it was almost no more than a hop, skip, and a jump to the Pacific Ocean on the other side. So this was a huge deal. This was the high point of Jefferson's administration and his presidency. What was the low point? What was the worst of Jefferson's presidency? The Embargo Act of 1807. And once again, it required a stretching of Jefferson's constitutional principles. The United States was caught still in the war between Britain and France. The British and the French both seized American ships, committed depredations against America's merchant marine, and violated America's neutral rights. Jefferson, being a Republican, the more pro-French of the parties, blamed the British for most of this, and for a time he prepared for war against Britain. But he didn't want to go to war. He didn't think the United States was ready for war, and he wasn't a warmonger type. So he had to figure out how to end the violations of America's neutral rights, neutral trading rights. That Jefferson's interpretation of the rights was that Americans, as a neutral country, their country was neutral, had a right to trade with Britain, had a right to trade with France, and they shouldn't be involved in the war. The British said, no, you don't have a right to trade with France. The French said, no, you don't have a right to trade with Britain. And this led to the seizure of all of these American ships. So Jefferson thought, what can I do to end these violations of American rights? Oh, I know. I will work through Congress, but Jefferson had control over the Republican Party in Congress. I will basically order American merchants and ship owners to keep their vessels in port. The British can't seize American vessels if there are no vessels on the high seas. The French can't seize American vessels if there are no American vessels on the high seas. So we'll basically he declared an embargo of American trade. Ships simply could not leave American ports, and that way they wouldn't get seized. They wouldn't provide the occasion for war against Britain and France. Jefferson hoped that this would be a temporary measure. He hoped to prepare the United States better for a war that might come. But he hoped that it would put pressure on the British to go easy, because he thought that the British needed the goods that the Americans were sending. He thought the French would ease up too, because the French presumably wanted the goods that Americans were sending. So this was the Embargo Act. It created an outrage among the merchants, among sailors who made their living on boats, among farmers who shipped goods overseas. It ravaged the American economy. People were saying, what are you doing? Basically, you're cutting off America's nose to spite your fate. And they said, well, this is an obvious thing for Jefferson to do. Jefferson's not a merchant. Jefferson doesn't like the merchant class anyway, the business classes. This is exactly what you would expect of a Republican president. Jefferson was, the embargo did not work well. It was widely violated. Smugglers, America started smuggling. They'd been smuggling before the American Revolution. They quickly started doing that. And it didn't persuade the British and the French to change their views. The embargo was a really sad last chapter of Jefferson's presidency. Following the Washington example of leaving office after two terms, Jefferson did not run for re-election in 1808, and he left office at the beginning of 1809. The embargo was a failure. It was repealed. It was actually revised. And eventually, the United States went to war against Britain anyway. But that's the chapter on James Madison. For Jefferson, the high point is the best thing he did was the purchase of Louisiana. The worst thing he did was to persuade Congress to pass the Embargo Act.